The 1992 animated classic Aladdin had a huge impact on not just Disney, but the animation industry as a whole, pioneering new techniques, casting one of the biggest actors on the planet, updating and adapting the source material, and of course undergoing plenty of mid-production drama and last-minute changes that surrounds many of the 90s Disney movies. After a steady decline in the success and thus production of their animated features, releasing only 8 fully animated feature films in the 19 years between 1970 and 1989, the company saw a revival after 1989's The Little Mermaid, which, after some hints from Who Framed Roger Rabbit and Oliver & Company in the previous year, proved that there was still a place for musically based animated retellings of older stories. The years that followed saw the Disney Renaissance, a return to form for the studio and some of their best and most consistent work in decades. The Little Mermaid was followed by The Rescuers Down Under, an often overlooked sequel to 1977's The Rescuers, which, although it is overlooked, doesn't quite fit in with the musical adaptations of older stories that most other Renaissance movies can be categorised into. After The Rescuers Down Under came Beauty and the Beast, which, like The Little Mermaid, was a huge hit, being nominated for and winning several awards, including being the first animated feature to be nominated for Best Film at the Academy Awards. Where The Little Mermaid was based on the Hans Christian Andersen story, and Beauty and the Beast was a retelling of the French fairy tale, Disney continued to mine existing stories from other cultures, and for their 1992 feature went to the Arabic folktale of Aladdin and the Magic Lamp, which was from the Book of 1001 Nights, also known as the Arabian Nights. In 1988, as Disney was beginning to refocus their efforts into musical features, lyricist Howard Ashman envisioned an animated music-centric version of the original Aladdin story. Ashman's initial draft was shelved and he, along with Alan Menken, began to work on the music for The Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast. Ashman's vision was essentially an animated Broadway musical, with he and Menken having created Little Shop of Horrors a few years earlier. But not too long after writing Beauty and the Beast, Linda Wolverton decided to rework Ashman's original draft, adding some new elements. The original story of Aladdin focuses on a young man who lives with his mother after his father's death. He is manipulated into retrieving a magical lamp from a cave by a sorcerer and given a magical ring to help him do so. He ends up trapped in the cave with both the ring and the lamp, but the ring reveals a genie, which helps him to escape, after which he heads back to his mother. Aladdin's mother then cleans the lamp from the cave and another more powerful genie appears. With his limitless wishes, Aladdin manages to prevent the Sultan's daughter marrying the Vizier's son, setting himself up nicely with a big fancy palace, new wife and living a rather luxurious life. Eventually the sorcerer, who isn't actually the same person as the Vizier, returns and steals the lamp, but Aladdin manages to use the original genie to retrieve his new possessions and defeat the evil sorcerer. There is admittedly a lot more to it that sees the sorcerer pretend to be Aladdin's uncle, some complications with the more powerful genie magic versus the other less powerful genie magic, and the sorcerer's brother showing up for revenge near the end, but that's the general idea and one that the original Aladdin followed. Linda Wolverton decided to combine much of these elements with a number of ideas, and by ideas I mean characters, plot points, motivations and everything else you can think of, from the 1940 movie The Thief of Baghdad, which was a remake of the 1924 film from Douglas Fairbanks, both being adaptations of stories from 1001 Nights. The elements Disney decided to borrow from The Thief of Baghdad include the sorcerer and Grand Vizier being the same person and him being named Jafar, a princess who falls in love with the main character but that Jafar also wants, a best friend and accomplice called Abu, who here is admittedly a human and not a monkey, although he does get turned into a dog, and a genie with only 3 wishes, rather than the unlimited wishes as in the original Aladdin story. There's also a sultan who's really into toys and contraptions, and a flying carpet. Once the Disney higher-ups were happier with the new story outline from Wolverton, directors John Musker and Ron Clements, who had directed The Little Mermaid, were given their choice of projects, and picked Aladdin over Beauty and the Beast. The duo turned that story outline into a screenplay, getting to work on much of the early production. With the script, story reels, some casting talks and character designs in place, Aladdin was well on its way to becoming the next Disney hit. That is until the infamous Black Friday, when everyone at Disney took the day off to get a load of discounted electrical goods. Or at least that's what they wish they were doing. The Black Friday of Aladdin's production refers to the day after directors Clements and Musker showed the early story reels to the then head of Disney Animation, Jeffrey Katzenberg. After seeing the movie so far, Katzenberg decided almost everything about the film needed to change, all except the movie's release date. According to Musker, Katzenberg's initial response was, well, that's a lot of movie. But after he gathered his thoughts and could articulate what he meant, he decided he didn't like almost everything from the character designs to the storyline. After the existing team spent around a week reshaping the story, screenwriters Ted Elliott and Terry Rossio, who would go on to write movies like The Mask of Zorro, Shrek, Pirates of the Caribbean, and a huge number of both animated and live action hits, were then brought on board to refine and alter the script. Some of the changes they made brought the script even more in line with The Thief of Baghdad, and included strictly keeping it to 3 wishes, which had been in doubt for a while, and removing Aladdin's mother from the film, who up until that point was a key character as she was in the original story. For the film's look, the design of the fictional city and setting for most of the film Agrabah came from combining the instantly recognisable Disney style with classic Arabian artwork and imagery. The main production designer, Richard van der Wende, wanted the buildings to be very stylised, smooth and curved. They were intended to deliver a recognisable Arabic city, but in a very Disney way. In terms of the characters, Eric Goldberg, who was the lead animator on The Genie and the first hired on the movie, went to the work of Al Hirschfeld for the overall look. Goldberg looked to Disneyfy the exaggerations and character that Al Hirschfeld was able to express in his artwork. This influence is clear throughout, but is at its purest with the Genie himself. In an effort to see how they could animate to Robin Williams, Goldberg and the animation team produced some small sequences with the Genie animated to sections of Robin Williams' stand-up, which eventually helped bring Williams on board. Some of the animation team also re-watched MC Hammer's Hammer Time video to bring in some of that character and style. For the title character, the original Aladdin was much younger, supposed to be in his early teens in the vein of a young Michael J. Fox. This version was meant to play into him as a young innocent boy, much more than the final iteration which we see in the movie. This contrasted with Jasmine, who was always designed as a late teens, more womanly princess, and was animated by Mark Henn, who had led the animation on both Ariel from The Little Mermaid and Belle from Beauty and the Beast. Henn, who struggled with how to make Jasmine different from the 2 main female characters he had recently worked on, eventually based her on his sister. Although there's plenty of rumours that Jasmine was based on Jennifer Connelly, and Henn admits she's based on a number of different things, he does insist she's specifically based on a high school graduation picture of his younger sister. For the villain of the film, Disney went to Andreas Deja, who had worked on multiple characters since 1985's The Black Cauldron, but had most recently designed and supervised Gaston in Beauty and the Beast. Similar to Jasmine, Deja initially struggled with Jafar's look, but after seeing other characters who had smoother, more rounded and curved lines, Jafar was created to directly contrast with that, instead being tall, slim, more menacing and pointy. After some use of 3D CGI in very specific sequences like the ballroom dance in Beauty and the Beast, and in backgrounds and ships for The Little Mermaid, Aladdin sought to push this a step further and have a fully CGI character with the magic carpet. Unfortunately, the plan didn't quite work, and it ended up being easier and delivering a better result by hand animating the shape of the carpet, but used the CGI to add in a more complex pattern than would be possible to consistently draw. There were also other CGI elements such as the chessboard in the game between the carpet and the Genie, the Cave of Wonders escape sequence, and the Cave of Wonders itself. With Howard Ashman's initial pitch for Aladdin being rejected, but eventually revisited and updated for production, the natural choice for the music was Ashman and Menken. Ashman had originally pitched the genie to be someone like jazz musicians Fats Waller or Cab Calloway, and the idea for the music itself was to be more like a Broadway musical than other Disney movies. Whilst finalising their work on Beauty and the Beast, Menken and Ashman began Aladdin. They wrote 16 songs, but only Arabian Nights, Friend Like Me and Prince Ali made it into the final film. In 1991, before Beauty and the Beast had been fully released, and over a year away from Aladdin, Howard Ashman died due to complications from HIV. Ashman received a posthumous Academy Award for Beauty and the Beast and was posthumously nominated for Aladdin's Friend Like Me. After Ashman's death, Menken was unsure how to move forward, having worked together on numerous projects for years. Menken eventually went to British lyricist Tim Rice, and the two finished Aladdin's songs, including A Whole New World, which was actually what topped A Friend Like Me for the Best Original Song Academy Award. As with most animated features, the audio recording started relatively early, with a number of recordings taking place before the final movie is set. Aladdin also saw a shift from the studio on whether or not the actors also had to be able to sing, for the first time bringing in some bigger talent and then separate singers for the musical numbers. For the title character, Disney went to Scott Weinger, who was relatively unknown, but became more familiar in 1991, around a year before Aladdin's release, when he was cast as Steve Hale in Full House. Since Aladdin, Weinger's career has seen him reprise the role continuously, although for the music, the studio decided to hire Brad Kane to sing. For the heroine, Jasmine saw a relatively late confirmation, with producers going through a grueling casting process that took months. After nearly 6 months of auditions, Linda Larkin was selected, who, despite being different from what the team originally had in mind for her, brought something unique to the role. Jasmine became the first Disney princess to have separate singing and acting voices, with Lea Salonga emulating Larkin's voice for the songs. For the villain, Jafar, who had already been designed to contrast with the rest of the film, Disney went to stage and voice actor Jonathan Freeman. Jafar was animated alongside recordings of Freeman to bring in as many of his expressions and mannerisms as possible. For Jafar's henchbird, Iago, the casting of Gilbert Gottfried saw the design of the character altered to better suit him, rather than the original idea of an old-fashioned British butler bird, which seemingly turned into Zazu in 1994's The Lion King. But when talking about the voices of Aladdin, the main event is Robin Williams as the genie. Williams was arguably the biggest contemporary star Disney had cast in one of their animated features, and provided a performance that redefined animation voice acting. Only making Williams' seminal take on the genie even more impressive is the fact that most of it was improvised and taken from a minimal number of recording sessions. Although there is some slight difference in how much audio he recorded, with some sources citing around 16 hours, he, at different times, has said it's closer to 24 or 30 hours. To encourage Williams to add in his own personality and as much improvisation as possible, he was given topics and props to discuss. Williams' performance proved so good that many of the scenes involving the genie were altered to incorporate his dialogue and improvisation, which resulted in the genie becoming the real star of the movie. But the Black Friday disaster wasn't the only time changes had to be made. Months later, Katzenberg decided on even more changes, specifically a complete redesign of Aladdin himself. Katzenberg decided that the younger approach to Aladdin wasn't working in the final movie. He questioned why an older, beautiful princess would be so interested in a small boy so much younger than herself.
Are you an angel? What? An angel. You're a funny little boy.
And so Aladdin's design was overhauled, aging him up to make him rougher and more of a street rat, going off the idea of making him, as Katzenberg's suggestion, more like Tom Cruise than Michael J. Fox, something they took very literally.
Whoa, this is heavy.
Jasmine, who had been the primary instigator behind Aladdin's redesign, was given more of a character in the later version of the story, but her design did remain the same. Katzenberg's problem with Jasmine was her voice, and he asked Linda Larkin, who was months into the recording process, to re-audition for the role. But the trouble for Aladdin wasn't exclusively tied to the changes it had to make, and Disney's later actions also led to a huge fallout with Robin Williams. Williams took a huge pay cut for Aladdin based on a very specific advertisement agreement. Williams was paid only the Screen Actors Guild base rate pay. Now admittedly that is tens of thousands of dollars for the 24 to 30 hours, but Williams redefined what the movie could and should be, and it was significantly less than his usual fee of $8 million per movie. And it was absolutely nothing compared to what Disney would go on to make from Aladdin. Williams famously said that Mickey Mouse only had 3 fingers, so he couldn't pick up a check. The condition to Williams taking a smaller fee and the role itself was that he, and by extension the genie, was not to be used to sell the movie and merchandise. And he likened this to his breakout role as Mork in Happy Days and Mork and Mindy. He explained that he didn't mind them using the look as it was something specifically created for that show and character. It was his own voice that he didn't want to be used without his control. Unfortunately, although it's worth keeping in mind very intentionally, Disney went back on their agreement. Posted for the movie had the genie taking up a much larger percentage than Williams had agreed. The trailers and merchandise were filled with his voice, and his fame and performance was used as one of the key marketing tools for the film. In an effort to appease Williams, the studio later sent him a Picasso painting worth over $1 million to apologise, but it did little to repair the relationship between him and the studio. Years afterwards, when Joe Roth replaced Jeffrey Katzenberg as head of Disney Animation, he publicly apologised to Williams. In the end, Williams' recordings for Aladdin were so detailed, and there was so much of it, that Disney intended to make even more money out of it by using it in a spin-off prequel based on the genie. But Williams' will prevents any company, but it was likely aimed at Disney specifically, from repurposing any unused recordings or footage for at least 25 years after his death. But not content with pissing off just one Williams, another of Aladdin's scandals, which is a little more arguable, comes down to Richard Williams and his movie The Thief and the Cobbler. The Thief and the Cobbler has a story unlike any other animated film, and was in production for over 30 years. Written, produced, directed and animated by Richard Williams, the movie's development began in 1964, and spent so long in production that it was released a number of times by different distributors in various states of production. Each of these versions had been the product of different investors putting in some money, and then being dissatisfied with the length of time the project was taking, so releasing an edited version of the incomplete film based on what was available. The connection to Disney's film comes with both being based on the original 1001 Nights story, and the fact that The Thief and the Cobbler was nearly 30 years into its production by Aladdin's 1992 release. Now admittedly, there's no problem with Disney making a movie based on similar source material to a pre-existing or in-production animated film, and the similarities with characters would presumably come from that source material rather than any nefarious copying. But two of Aladdin's key animators, Eric Goldberg, who led and designed the genie, and Andreas Deja, who led and designed Jafar, had worked for Williams in the past, whilst he will have been working on The Thief and the Cobbler. Goldberg worked for Williams' production company in the 70s and 80s, and Deja worked with him on Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Admittedly, there's no proof either knew about The Thief and the Cobbler, and I'm not accusing anyone, but its version of the Grand Vizier bears a striking resemblance to Jafar, and if anything, thanks to his blue skin, almost looks like a combination of the genie and Jafar. Despite a huge overhaul relatively late on in production, Aladdin made its release date of November in 1992. And it quickly became an even bigger hit than either The Little Mermaid or Beauty and the Beast, and went on to become the most successful film at the box office of the entire year. It was thus Disney's biggest selling animated feature, a record it unfortunately only held until Disney's next animated feature. There were however a number of more negative observations, mainly at how American looking both Aladdin and Jasmine were, and the depiction of Arabic characters. These complaints came to a head in criticism from the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee towards the film's opening song Arabian Nights. The song originally featured the lyric, "Where they cut off your ear if they don't like your face." This was changed to where it's flat and immense and the heat is intense, in the home video and consequent release of the film and its soundtrack. In addition to this, no Disney film would be complete without some kind of scandalous sexually suggestive message. There is of course the sex scene in Lion King, and the bishop's overexcitement from The Little Mermaid. In Aladdin, there's a brief moment where he seemingly says, "Good teenagers, take off your clothes."
Come on, good teenagers, take off your clothes. Come on, good teenagers, take off your clothes. Come on, good teenagers, take off your clothes.
Although the studio insists that the original line was something along the lines of "Good tiger, take off, go," and that some of their audio and the tiger's growl interfere with how the line is delivered. Aside from those problems, however, Aladdin proved a huge hit with audiences. The film was popular with all age brackets, with the more traditional elements and characters appealing to younger audiences, and the more adult and primarily Robin Williams moments bringing in their parents. Upon its VHS release, Aladdin quickly became one of the best-selling movies in the US, now standing at the third best-selling VHS tape ever, behind The Lion King and Snow White. Due to Aladdin's success, particularly on home video, Disney quickly set up plans for a sequel. This came in the form of the Aladdin TV series, following in the vein of The Little Mermaid. But to give the series that extra push, a direct-to-video movie was produced as a pilot. The Return of Jafar was Disney's first of many direct-to-video animated features, and as such was produced on a significantly smaller budget. Almost all of the main voice cast returned, except for Douglas Steele as the Sultan, and of course Robin Williams, who refused to return thanks to the ongoing feud between him and the studio. The genie was instead voiced by Dan Castellaneta, who is best known for voicing Homer Simpson.
Uh-huh! Oh, $20! I wanted a peanut!
Although The Return of Jafar was intended to be a feature-length pilot to the TV series, the show actually aired before The Return of Jafar was released. It had the same voice cast as the direct-to-video sequel and ran from February 1994 to November 1995, following Aladdin, Jasmine, Iago, Abu and the Genie around a year after the original film had ended. The series leads right up to the third Aladdin movie, Aladdin and the King of Thieves, which adapts another story from 1001 Nights, Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. The third movie sees the return of Aladdin's father, Cassim, who is now the titular King of Thieves, and details why he left Aladdin and his mother. It received another mixed reception, but famously saw the return of Robin Williams as the genie after Disney had publicly apologised. The characters of Aladdin have appeared in a number of other Disney properties, like the House of Mouse and House of Villains, as well as the Kingdom Hearts video games. Aladdin, Jasmine, Abu and Jafar later appeared in Hercules and the Arabian Night, an episode of Hercules the animated series that sees Jafar take on Hercules and Hades go up against Aladdin. By 2010, work had begun on a stage version of Aladdin, following The Lion King's hugely successful Broadway adaptation. The play saw some new music by Alan Menken and Chad Beglin, as well as returning to a number of elements from Howard Ashman's original pitch for the movie. The play even saw the return of Jonathan Freeman as Jafar for its Broadway debut. In 2019, Disney released a new version of Aladdin as part of their live-action remakes. Directed by Guy Ritchie, who has a pedigree of shooting slick action and stories around young thieves and criminals, the movie stars Mina Massoud as Aladdin, Naomi Scott as Jasmine, Marwan Kenzari as a de-aged Jafar, Nasim Petrad as Jasmine's handmaiden Dahlia, who was cut from an earlier version of the animated movie and replaced with Raja, and Will Smith as the genie. Just like the Aladdin sequels, the film was met with a lukewarm critical response, and viewed as a solid adaptation of the 1992 original, but adding little new to the story and definitely not surpassing the animated classic. It did however gross over $1 billion at the global box office and proved to be enough of a hit for sequel talks to take place. All in all, Aladdin may not be the biggest Disney franchise to come out of the 90s, with other huge hitters like The Lion King and Beauty and the Beast, but there is no denying how important it was to both Disney's Renaissance era and the animation industry as a whole. Aladdin pushed animation in a wholly new direction, showcasing a number of new techniques, casting one of the biggest actors in the world as what became one of the biggest characters in animation, and ultimately established a legacy as one of the most beloved Disney franchises of all time.